Hey everybody, earlier this week I released a new tutorial, a written tutorial on the blog that covered how to make a local capacitor plugin so that you could run some native iOS code from your Ionic application. And so the main point of this blog post was around, I guess, not having to rely on there being a core API available in Capacitor or having to find a community created plugin to do what you want. If you understand how to write a little bit of native code and how to set up your own local plugins, you can run whatever native code you like without having to find a plugin that works for you. And so if you haven't read that tutorial already, I would recommend reading that first. I'll link to that because it gives a lot more context on how to do this. The focus of that tutorial was on iOS, and the point of this video is to do the same thing but with Android. But since we've already covered a lot of the general sort of concepts around capacitor plugins and local plugins, I won't be covering that again here. So unless you already know about all that stuff, I would recommend definitely reading that other tutorial first. So what we have on screen here is the plugin we created for iOS in the previous tutorial. And I'm going to just fly through this really quickly for a bit of context, but the basic idea is we just create this new Swift file inside of our application in Xcode. It's important that you have the iOS platform added through Capacitor. So we just create this distance plugin.swift file, and then inside of here, you can see we have the full implementation of the plugin that we've created. But the important parts are that we're importing Capacitor up at the top here. We're also importing HealthKit because that's the functionality that we want to make use of in this plugin. We have a class here, which has a type of cap plugin. And then we have our two method calls, and we created methods called authorize and get distance. And so these aren't functions that are always required or anything like that. These are just the functions that we want to implement to enable this HealthKit functionality. And so the point of the authorize call is to go through the authorization steps required to get permission from the user to use their HealthKit data. And then the getDistance method has the purpose of basically just returning the sum of the distance that user has walked or run since the date that is provided to this method. And so we have the capacitor call being passed in both cases here. In the case of getDistance, we use that call to grab any start date that was passed in from Ionic. And then we do all of our native stuff, whatever's required. And then at the end, we make a call to call.resolve to return the result of whatever stuff we did in native land. So we create this Swift file, and then we have this Objective-C file as well, which matches the name of our distance plugin.swift. And this basically just sets up the capacitor plugin. You can see here we have distance plugin, and then we have our two methods that we created. And once we do this, we can then access those in our code. You can see here, all we're doing is grabbing a reference to that distance plugin, which is added to the capacitor runtime once we create this local plugin. And then we can just make calls to that from our Ionic application. So you can see here I do await distance plugin.authorize to perform that authorization step, and then distance plugin.getDistance. And so this will return the data that we need from HealthKit. So I did intend originally to implement this same plugin in Android just to show you how the different approaches worked, or they're very similar with Capacitor. The main point is on demonstrating the actual approach to creating plugins and running native code, not so much the HealthKit implementation itself. Unfortunately for Android, the implementation for, I think it's called the Fit API or whatever it's called, I haven't actually implemented that yet, but it is quite a bit more complicated than implementing HealthKit because you need to set up the application in the developer console. You need to use OAuth, and I didn't really want to deal with all that in this video. So what I am going to do, if there's any interest in the actual fitness API side of it, I'll create a separate blog post that walks through implementing all of that. But what I want to do right now is just talk through the general approach to doing the same sort of thing that we're doing here, creating a local capacitor plugin to run native code, but for Android. So you'll see here, I've created the same sort of file here called distance plugin. This is a Java file, and that is created inside of this Java folder here, and then under the package for your application. So basically to get to this point, you just need to make sure you have the Android platform added through Capacitor, and you also need to open this up in Android Studio by running npx cap open Android. So you can just come to this package here. Your package name will most likely be different, but just right click on that, say new Java class, and you'll be able to create a file that looks like this one. And this is following the format of a typical sort of Capacitor plugin here. And you can see here we're using a native plugin. We have this little decorator thing here, and we also have our methods decorated with plugin method as well. So you'll need to make sure to use this general structure. And you can see we've got this authorize call and the get distance method set up as well. So this general sort of API is going to be exactly the same as our Xcode implementation. We have an authorize method and a get distance method. The implementations just look a little bit different. So although the general sort of structure and boilerplate code might look a little bit different, we still have the same basic concepts here. So we're passing in that capacitor call to the methods, and then we can, again, grab that start date if we want by doing call.getString and just pass in the value that we're trying to grab. And again, once we're done, once we've done whatever native stuff we need to do, we just pass the value back to Capacitor to our Ionic application using call.resolve. Or if we wish, we can also say call.reject, which will make that fail. And so the general idea is that we just have our sort of bit at the top here, which is getting the data that's passed in to this method from our Ionic application through Capacitor. At the end of it, we have the data we're passing back, and then just whatever native code we want to run in the middle, we do that. So in this case, we would want to go and grab some data from that fitness API. As I said before, the actual implementation of that is going to look a bit more complicated than the health kit implementation did, where we could sort of just contain everything in this little these little functions here. But the general idea is that whatever native code you want to run, you can trigger that here and then pass back whatever you need to the browser at the end of that. And you can even, if you like, launch intents. You can launch native screens as well as part of what you're doing. You don't just have to do something in the background and pass a value back. So you really sort of have the access to the full power of the native application here. You can do whatever you like. This is just normal native code. We've just got these little extra bits here to allow some communication between our Ionic application and Android. So once you have the code that you want, you're all happy with that, you just need to register the plugin in your main activity class here. And so basically you just come inside of this init call here, and you just write add, and then in our case it's distance plugin.class, and we're importing that as well. But whatever plugin you've created, you just make a call to that add there. You could have multiple calls to add multiple plugins here as well if you want. And once you have done that, you will be able to access these methods through Ionic. So if we were to run this code again, except run it on Android instead of iOS, we could make use of what we've just written. Now in the case of Android, we haven't actually fully implemented this plugin, so all it's going to do for now is just pass back this example value, whereas with the iOS version, it actually grabbed that data from HealthKit. But we can still see the general idea of how that actually works. So what I'm going to do now is run this application on a simulator. Let's actually just run that on my device directly because the simulator's a little bit slow. Let's go with my Google Pixel 2. So we'll just bring that up and take a look. So you're not going to be able to see the actual screen, obviously, because it's running on my phone now, but all it is a get distance button, so it's not that exciting. But what I'll do is I'll bring up the debugging tool. Okay, I'll just drag that over here. So you can see it anyway there. You can see the little get distance button. So what I'm going to do is I have the console up right now. And when we click on that get distance button, we should see this get distance method will be triggered. It's going to run this code. It's going to pass this value back to our call here to get distance, and then we are just going to log that out. So basically we should be able to click the button and then see this value, or this object rather, with the total distance and that value logged out to the console. So let's do that now. Let's check that it works. I'm tapping get distance now, and you can see all these calls here. First we call authorize, and that returns, and then we make a call to the get distance method, and that returns with this value here. And you can see we have total distance 3,492.123, which is what is here. So using this basic structure, you can run whatever native code you like. Obviously some native code is going to be more complex and difficult to write than others, and you will either need to have some understanding of Java or of Swift, or if not, you might just be able to sort of get through creating what you need through Google searches and looking at the documentation and that kind of thing. A lot of the time it might just be something simple you need, and as is the case with HealthKit implementation here, the code isn't the easiest code to look at in the world, but it is relatively small and easy to actually get that HealthKit data. So I hope this tutorial was helpful, as well as the iOS tutorial as well. With those two methods, you can run whatever iOS or Android code you need without having to worry about finding a plugin that already provides that functionality for you. So if you like this video, let me know, leave a like and subscribe. Also, if you do want to see that larger blog post on actually implementing the fitness API for Android as well, if there's interest in that, I will create that blog post. So again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.